In a peaceful suburban neighborhood, life took a frustrating turn when Mr. Crowley, the authoritarian president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, began imposing increasingly absurd and oppressive rules. What should have been a community effort to maintain property values and aesthetics turned into a personal power trip for Crowley, who seemed to take pleasure in micromanaging his neighbors' lives. Residents found themselves facing fines for the most trivial infractions, things that had no impact on the beauty or safety of the neighborhood. One particularly egregious example involved a family receiving a hefty fine for allowing their children to build a simple cardboard fort in their front yard, an activity that should have been celebrated as wholesome childhood fun rather than penalized. Crowley's nitpicking extended to house colors as well. Even the slightest deviation from the approved palette resulted in rejection, forcing homeowners to either repaint at great cost or face endless bureaucratic battles. His behavior wasn't about maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood, it was about control, about ensuring that everyone adhered strictly to his personal vision of order. Over time, the resentment in the community grew, and many began to question whether Crowley was truly acting in their best interests. Among those who took notice of Crowley's overreach was the protagonist's mother, an intelligent and determined woman who refused to accept arbitrary authority without scrutiny. Her frustration with the unjust fines and over-regulation led her to investigate Crowley's governance, and what she discovered was far worse than she had imagined. Digging through financial records and HOA contracts, she found a pattern of corruption so blatant it was astonishing that no one had noticed it before. Crowley had been awarding inflated contracts to companies owned by his own family members, siphoning thousands of dollars from the HOA's funds each month. What should have been reasonable maintenance and administrative costs had ballooned under his leadership, not because of necessary expenses but because of blatant self-serving financial arrangements. Armed with this damning evidence, she set out to expose Crowley's corruption to the entire community. She meticulously documented the financial discrepancies, gathering proof that left no room for doubt. When the time came to present her findings, she rallied the homeowners together, showing them exactly how Crowley had been exploiting them for his own gain. This revelation sparked outrage among the residents, who finally saw the man for what he was, a dictator lining his own pockets at their expense. With momentum on her side, the protagonist's mother did not stop at merely exposing Crowley. She went a step further and ran for HOA president herself. Her campaign centered on transparency, fairness, and the promise to restore sanity to the HOA's governance. Homeowners, eager for change, rallied behind her, and in a decisive vote, Crowley was ousted from his position. The new HOA board, under her leadership, immediately set about undoing the damage he had caused. Absurd rules were eliminated, allowing families to once again enjoy their homes without fear of being fined for harmless activities. Fair bidding processes were reinstated for neighborhood contracts, ensuring that HOA funds were used responsibly rather than being funneled into nepotistic schemes. The changes had a profound effect on the community. Property values began to rise, not because of rigid enforcement of petty rules, but because people wanted to live in a neighborhood where fairness and reason prevailed. More importantly, a sense of trust was restored among the residents. No longer did they feel like they were living under the thumb of an authoritarian HOA president. Instead, they saw their HOA as what it was meant to be, a collective effort to maintain and improve their community. Unfortunately, peace was short-lived. Just as the neighborhood had begun to heal, a new adversary emerged, Harrison Walsh, the nephew of the disgraced Crowley. Walsh had observed his uncle's reign and sought to reclaim power, learning from Crowley's mistakes but maintaining the same authoritarian tendencies. Once elected as the new HOA president, he quickly reinstated the very policies the community had fought to remove. Harsh fines returned, arbitrary rule enforcement became the norm, and once again, homeowners found themselves at the mercy of a power-hungry individual. However, this time the community was prepared. They had learned from their previous struggle and knew that documentation, solidarity, and persistence were key to combating corruption. Residents began collecting evidence of Walsh's mismanagement and financial dealings, suspecting that he, like his uncle, was engaging in shady practices. Their suspicions were confirmed when they discovered that Walsh had secretly reinstated some of Crowley's fraudulent contracts. The neighborhood was outraged, but rather than resorting to frustration or passive acceptance, they took decisive action. Determined to rid themselves of corrupt leadership once and for all, the homeowners gathered the necessary proof and initiated a no-confidence vote against Walsh. Unlike Crowley, who had managed to maintain his grip on power for years, Walsh's downfall was swift. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and when confronted, he had no viable defense. The community's unity and persistence paid off. Walsh was removed from office, and a fair, honest board was elected in his place. The first order of business was to cancel all fraudulent contracts, ensuring that HOA funds were properly allocated toward maintaining and improving the neighborhood rather than lining the pockets of corrupt officials. This victory solidified an important lesson for the community. An HOA should exist to serve its residents, not to control them. With the right leadership, an HOA could enhance property values and foster a sense of belonging. But with the wrong leadership, it could become an instrument of tyranny. By standing together, documenting everything, and using legal channels, the homeowners proved that even the most entrenched corruption could be dismantled. Their success was not just about removing one corrupt leader, it was about setting a precedent that their community would never again. Far from the suburban chaos of HOA corruption, another battle was brewing, one that pitted a self-sufficient farmer against an overreaching homeowners association that had no legitimate claim to his land. The farmer, who had spent years cultivating his property into a sustainable haven, was blindsided when he received legal notices from an HOA located miles away, claiming that his land encroached on their jurisdiction. The problem? He had never signed any HOA agreements, nor did he live within their designated boundaries. Yet, this rogue HOA was determined to assert control, relying on a forged map that falsely extended their authority to include his property. At first, the farmer dismissed their claims as a simple misunderstanding, but the HOA was relentless. They bombarded him with notices demanding compliance with their arbitrary rules, including restrictions on fencing, livestock, and even the type of crops he could grow. When he refused to acknowledge their authority, they escalated their tactics, threatening legal action, imposing fraudulent fines, and even attempting to block his access to public utilities. This was not just a fight over land. It was an attempt to bully an independent individual into submission using deception, and the situation reached a shocking climax when the HOA took matters into their own hands, literally. Without warning, heavy machinery arrived at the farmer's property, accompanied by HOA representatives who claimed they were enforcing community standards. As the farmer watched in disbelief, they bulldozed a section of his land, destroying valuable crops, fencing, and part of his irrigation system. The sheer audacity of their actions was staggering. The HOA had no legitimate authority, no legal claim, and yet they acted as though they had absolute power over his property. The financial loss was devastating, but the emotional toll was even greater. The farmer had poured years of hard work into creating a self-sufficient lifestyle, only to see it torn apart in a matter of hours by an overreaching bureaucracy that had no business interfering in his life. However, rather than giving in to despair, he did what any rational person would do. He fought back. He immediately contacted legal experts, gathered evidence of the destruction, and began preparing a lawsuit that would expose the HOA's fraudulent actions. Armed with legal documents proving his rightful ownership of the land, the farmer took the HOA to court, determined to hold them accountable for their unlawful actions. The case quickly gained attention as a glaring example of HOA overreach, with many rallying behind the farmer in support. His legal team presented irrefutable evidence, including satellite images, property deeds, and witness testimonies that contradicted the HOA's claims. The forged map, which had been the basis of their harassment, was easily debunked, exposing the extent of their deception. Faced with undeniable proof of their wrongdoing, the HOA crumbled under legal scrutiny. The court ruled in the farmer's favor, ordering the HOA to pay for all damages, including the full cost of restoring his property and compensating him for lost income. Additionally, key HOA members involved in the fraud faced legal consequences, ensuring that they could never again abuse their positions of power. The victory was not just personal, it sent a powerful message to overreaching HOAs everywhere. Fraudulent claims and bullying tactics would not go unchallenged. The farmer's resilience and refusal to back down had not only saved his property but had also exposed a corrupt system. Not all battles against petty authority are fought in courtrooms. Sometimes, the best response is simple, well-executed humor. In an entirely different setting, a fast food worker at Taco Bell found himself dealing with an obnoxious customer who insisted on being called Daddy when placing his order. While it wasn't unusual for customers to use joke names, the way this particular individual demanded it, with an air of arrogance and a smirk, made it clear he was hoping to make the employees uncomfortable. Rather than letting the moment pass, the Taco Bell worker decided to play along in the most dramatic way possible. When the order was ready, he didn't just call out, "Daddy," in a normal tone. Instead, he grabbed the microphone, took a deep breath, and announced with theatrical enthusiasm, "Daddy, your supreme feast is ready. Daddy, come get your food." The entire restaurant turned to look as laughter erupted from customers and staff alike. The customer, who had clearly expected the name to be quietly mumbled, turned bright red as he awkwardly retrieved his meal. He had wanted attention, but certainly not like this. This moment of perfect harmless retaliation showed that sometimes the best way to deal with an obnoxious person is not with anger, but with humor and a touch of playful humility. These stories, while vastly different in setting and scale, all share common themes: the importance of standing up against abuse of power, the necessity of documenting everything, and the effectiveness of community solidarity. The HOA corruption cases underscore the importance of vigilance. Bad actors thrive when no one is watching, and the only way to counteract their influence is through transparency and accountability. Whether it's a suburban neighborhood fighting against a self-serving president or an independent farmer defending his land from fraudulent claims, the lesson is clear: knowledge and legal action are the greatest weapons against corruption. At the same time, the Taco Bell employee story reminds us that not all battles require legal intervention. Sometimes, a little wit and creativity are enough to put an overconfident person in their place. Whether dealing with an overreaching authority or just an annoying customer, knowing when to fight back and how to do it effectively can make all the difference. In the end, justice, whether serious or humorous, is best served when people refuse to be passive in the face of unfairness. One of the most powerful aspects of the mother's fight against the corrupt HOA was how she built her campaign from the ground up, relying not on flashy tactics or aggressive confrontation, but on the simple power of personal connection. Rather than merely complaining about Mr. Crowley's abuses or expecting change to happen on its own, she took action in a way that resonated with her neighbors. She understood that people are more likely to listen and engage when they feel personally involved, so she went door to door, talking to each homeowner, listening to their grievances, and offering them a vision of what a fair HOA could look like. What made her approach so effective was that she didn't just talk, she connected. She brought homemade lemon bars as a friendly gesture, something seemingly small but incredibly impactful in creating a sense of warmth and trust. This wasn't just about handing out flyers or making speeches. It was about rebuilding a fractured community by making people feel heard and valued. As neighbors began to realize they weren't alone in their frustrations, a collective movement started forming. The mother's ability to unify people around a common goal proved that true grassroots activism isn't about grandstanding. It's about building genuine relationships, one conversation at a time. Her efforts demonstrated that real change doesn't always come from the top down. Sometimes, it starts with something as simple as knocking on a neighbor's door and saying, "We can fix this together." Overthrowing a corrupt HOA president was a victory, but the true challenge came afterward, ensuring that the same kind of power abuse could never happen again. The mother, now HOA president, understood that replacing one leader with another wasn't enough. Lasting change required systemic reform. She and the new HOA board wasted no time in implementing safeguards to decentralize power and prevent a single person from holding unchecked authority. One of the most crucial changes was the introduction of a dual review process for all HOA violation notices. Under Crowley's reign, fines and citations had been handed out at his personal discretion, with no real oversight. The new system required that any violation be reviewed by at least 2 board members, ensuring that no single person could abuse their position for personal vendettas. Additionally, an appeals process was established so that homeowners had a fair chance to challenge any fines or citations without fear of retaliation. Transparency measures were also put in place, including open board meetings where financial reports were made readily available to all residents. This shift from authoritarian rule to a more democratic and accountable structure showed that true leadership isn't about wielding power, it's about ensuring that power is shared responsibly. By making these structural changes, the new board didn't just fix the immediate problem. They set a precedent for how HOAs should operate in the long term, ensuring that fairness and transparency would remain the foundation while legal action played a crucial role in the farmers' fight against the rogue HOA. What truly turned the tide was the power of media exposure. Initially, the farmer found himself battling an uphill legal struggle, as HOAs often have deep pockets and influence within local bureaucracies. Despite having clear evidence that the HOA had falsified documents and illegally bulldozed his property, he faced delays, legal roadblocks, and a slow-moving justice system that seemed more inclined to protect the HOA than an independent farmer. It wasn't until he reached out to a local news station that the situation began to shift. Reporters were immediately drawn to the David versus Goliath nature of his story, a hard-working, self-sufficient farmer being bullied by an overreaching HOA that had no rightful claim to his land. When the news segment aired, public outrage exploded. Social media amplified the story, with thousands of people voicing their support and demanding accountability. Suddenly, local politicians who had previously ignored the case started paying attention, and the court process that had been dragging on for months sped up significantly. This incident highlighted a crucial lesson. Legal battles can be slow and frustrating, but public pressure can be a powerful equalizer. HOAs, like many bureaucratic organizations, often rely on the assumption that individuals won't have the resources or platform to fight back. However, when corruption is exposed to the public eye, it becomes much harder for these organizations to operate unchecked. In the end, the farmer's victory wasn't just about winning in court, it was about proving that when the media shines a light on injustice, those in power are forced to reckon with their actions. The farmer's story was a stark reminder that living off-grid requires far more than just physical labor and agricultural knowledge. It also demands legal awareness and preparedness. Many people who choose a self-sufficient lifestyle focus on skills like farming, renewable energy, and water conservation, but few anticipate the bureaucratic and legal challenges that can arise. The farmer had assumed that because he legally owned his land, he was safe from external interference. He had worked tirelessly to make his property a model of sustainable living, growing his own food, collecting rainwater, and maintaining a small livestock population. What he hadn't prepared for was an outside entity, an HOA he had never signed up for, fabricating documents to claim control over his land. This ordeal underscored an essential truth. Independence doesn't mean isolation, and self-sufficiency isn't just about physical survival. It's also about protecting one's rights. In the aftermath of his victory, the farmer took steps to fortify his legal defenses, ensuring that he had airtight documentation of his land ownership, property boundaries, and zoning rights. His experience served as a cautionary tale to other off-grid residents, reinforcing the importance of not only knowing how to be self-sufficient, but also how to legally defend that self-sufficiency. While living off the grid offers freedom from many societal constraints, it also requires constant vigilance against those who might try to take that freedom away. The Taco Bell employee's response to the obnoxious customer illustrated a lighter, yet equally valuable lesson in handling inappropriate behavior. Sometimes, the best form of retaliation is clever, ethical, and undeniably effective. Unlike traditional confrontations, which can escalate into hostility, the employee's approach turned the situation into a public spectacle that subtly but decisively put the customer in his place. By complying with the request in an exaggerated and theatrical manner, announcing "Daddy" over the microphone with dramatic flair, he managed to highlight the ridiculousness of the situation without resorting to outright confrontation. This form of malicious compliance is a brilliant tactic because it adheres to the exact rules set by the person ma.